When you think of the Soviet Union, the image in your mind might be one of cold, industrial steel, but the reality was that Soviet engineers were every bit as creative as their Western counterparts. Today's roundup of Soviet-era prototype and concept cars proves just that. These wild designs could have challenged conventions and were creative in ways that we can barely imagine today. Welcome to Motor Kingdom, where we cover the best stories in the automotive world, on-road, off-road, and under the hood. Today we're looking at 20 of the wildest concept cars the Soviets came up with. First, hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to stay up to date on all our latest videos. During the Cold War, Soviet engineers were on a mission to outshine the West. They came up with some of the most mind-blowing, futuristic, and downright bizarre cars you've never heard of. Some were genius, others were just plain weird. But all were buried by history. Until now. What happens when Soviet engineers take inspiration from the sleek, aerodynamic cars of the West? Check out the Gaz-A Aero. It's like a futuristic teardrop on wheels. In 1934, before the Cold War kicked off, Soviet designers were already focused on speed and efficiency. The Gaz-A Aero was their initial shot at creating a car with better aerodynamics. Built on the Gaz-A chassis, it featured a sleek, rounded body that sliced through the air. With a 48-horsepower engine, it could surprisingly hit a top speed of 120 kilometers per hour, which was pretty fast back in the day. At first glance, it seemed like something from a sci-fi comic, but this was more than just a visual spectacle. The Soviets aimed to show that they could create cutting-edge car designs independently without relying on Western technology. It was all about trying out new ways to be self-sufficient and creative. Even with its sleek, futuristic design, the Gaz-A Aero never finished production. Why, you ask? Well, in Stalin's USSR, practicality was what really counted, way more than style or speed. Imagine a single headlight, 6 meters in length and fueled by a roaring V8. This was how the Soviet Union responded to America's flashy road monsters. The ZIS-112, known as the Cyclops, was a daring effort to compete with the flashy designs emerging from the US, especially GM's LeSabre concept. It was huge, 6 meters long, and had this one big headlight at the front, hence the nickname. It had a 186 horsepower V8 engine that really packed a punch for its era. But this was more than just a show car. The Cyclops was put to the test in Soviet racing competitions, really pushing the boundaries of what the USSR could do in automotive engineering. Have you ever wondered why we don't spot Cyclops-inspired Soviet cars cruising today? Even though the design really stood out, it just didn't work well in practice, cost a lot, and felt way too Western for the Soviet leaders. It was more of a statement than a solution, and in the end, it faded into history. Suppose you've got a reliable family sedan and then decide to transform it into a turbocharged racing beast. Soviet engineers really nailed it with the Pobeda Sport. In the early 1950s, the USSR was eager to show that it could hold its own against Europe's top sports cars. They took the simple Gaz M20 Pobeda, a practical vehicle for everyday folks, and turned it into a real speedster. The latest version came with a lightweight aluminum body, a turbocharged 105 horsepower engine, and could hit a top speed of 190 kilometers per hour, which was pretty impressive back then. The Pobeda Sport wasn't just a test run, it really got out there and raced in Soviet championships, standing up to other high-performance cars. Even though it did really well on the track, it never became a car that everyone could buy. In a country that really values practicality and industrial production, there just wasn't any room for a flashy, high-speed racer. The dream of a Soviet sports car would have to hold off for a bit. Can you believe there was an electric van back in the 1970s? Long before Elon Musk and Tesla, the Soviets were pioneering their own electric vehicles. So what was the verdict behind this ambitious enterprise? Let's just say it didn't turn out great. The VAZ-2702 Pony was the USSR's take on small electric city cars, like what was found in Japan. It was a little microvan made for zipping around city streets. It had a range of 70 kilometers and could carry up to 400 kilograms. Pretty neat, right? It seemed like an excellent idea for short-distance deliveries in Soviet cities. But there was this one major issue: the batteries. They were really heavy, not very efficient, and made the van feel super unbalanced, which was pretty dangerous. During crash tests, the Pony didn't just crumple, it actually broke in half, which is pretty shocking. So that quickly ended the experiment. Japan really embraced electric cars, but the Soviet Union decided to move away from that idea, showing that innovation in the final decade of the USSR had begun to slow down. Before the world had minivans, the Soviets attempted to create their own. It was brilliant, practical, and quickly forgotten. The Namio 50 Belka was a compact, rear-engine multi-purpose vehicle meant for both families and workers. It had a cab-forward design, modular seating, and a striking similarity to American vans such as the Chevrolet Corvair Greenbrier. The concept was simple: to design a people's van that was inexpensive, large, and efficient. It was ahead of its time, as were many other Soviet prototypes. But what's the problem? The USSR was not prepared for a consumer-driven automotive market. Mass manufacturing concentrated on robust, utilitarian automobiles, and the Belka was seen as too experimental. In another universe, this may have been the Soviet Union's response to the Volkswagen bus. Instead, it became just another lost idea. What are some ways to make a car go faster? Well, one approach is to keep it super light. The Zvezda 5 really pushed this idea to the limit. This tiny Soviet speedster tipped the scales at only 360 kilograms, lighter than a few motorcycles. It had this little 0.245-liter two-cylinder engine, but with its sleek design and lightweight, it could surprisingly reach 200 kilometers per hour. Yes, a microcar designed to take on those speedy British cars. But there was one thing to consider, and it was safety. It would be really serious if something were to go wrong at that weight and speed. In Soviet Russia, practicality was always more important than performance. The Zvezda 5 was an incredible piece of engineering, but it was too much for daily life. Just like a lot of daring Soviet projects, it got put on the back burner, making us curious about what might have happened. Imagine if your SUV could cruise on the road and seamlessly transition to gliding right over a river. Believe it or not, the Soviets built one that was military-grade. We're talking about the VAZ-2122 Reka, which is an amphibious take on the iconic Lada Niva. This off-roader, designed for the Soviet military, wasn't just about tackling challenging terrain. It was also made to navigate lakes and rivers with ease. With night vision, a sealed chassis, and the remarkable ability to be airdropped into combat zones, it was the USSR's take on Western amphibious vehicles like the Amphicar. While testing, it turned out to be quite impressive, moving seamlessly from land to water. Just when it was all set for production, the Soviet military decided to pull the plug. As the USSR's economy started to tighten in the 1980s, funding for specialized vehicles such as the Reka began to dwindle. Ultimately, it turned out to be an experimental wonder, something that could have made Soviet special forces even tougher. A luxury bus with airplane-style seats, a coffee machine, and even a toilet? That sounds amazing. This is what the Soviet Union considered first-class travel. Back in the early 1960s, Soviet engineers were really excited about the whole space race after Gagarin's historic flight. Everything needed to have that futuristic vibe, sleek and cutting-edge, even for public transport. The Ukraina bus offers a luxury traveling experience with 36 airplane-style seats, panoramic windows, and some nice onboard perks like a coffee machine and a bathroom. It wasn't just any bus. It represented progress and was meant to highlight the Soviet Union's tech prowess. Even though the design looked super futuristic, the actual production side of things was a different story. The country focused on mass transport rather than luxury travel, and the Ukraina bus only got as far as a few prototypes. For just a moment, it showed what Soviet luxury might have been like if the system had let it happen. What happens when two Soviets decide to create their own sports car from scratch? Check out the Lora, a fantastic car that even Gorbachev noticed. In the early 1980s, two Leningrad engineers, Dmitry Parfenov and Gennady Hainov, set out to establish that the Soviet Union could build a world-class sports car. In their workshop, they hand-built an engine, constructed a fiberglass body, and crafted a sleek, modern-looking coupe right out of a Western auto show. Despite being a do-it-yourself project, Lora was not a joke. It had front-wheel drive, a lightweight design, and innovative electronics, which were uncommon for Soviet vehicles at the time. When Gorbachev viewed the car in 1987, he allegedly lauded it as a model of Soviet ingenuity. Of course, this was the USSR, when private manufacturing of cars was essentially outlawed. The Lora never received official support, and only two were ever built. Nevertheless, it remains one of the most incredible and most rebellious Soviet vehicles ever produced. Have you heard about that truck named after Gorbachev's perestroika reforms? That's the level of hope the USSR had for this futuristic machine. The MAZ 2000 Perestroika was more than just a truck. It was a modular high-tech ride aiming to change the game for Soviet transportation. It had a detachable cab, interchangeable trailers, and a sleek modern design, all aimed at going head-to-head with the latest Western trucks. Back in 1988, it actually showed up at the Paris Motor Show and totally surprised everyone. Check out the Soviet truck. It actually looks pretty modern. It seems almost unbelievable. When the Soviet economy started to fall apart in the late 80s, the idea of a modular transport system faded away. The MAZ 2000 became more of a symbol for the unfulfilled promises of perestroika instead of a genuine industrial breakthrough. Achieving speeds of 223 kilometers per hour in a Soviet car in 1956 sounds impossible, right? The Moscovich G2 was the USSR's covert attempt to challenge Western racing supremacy. It had an aluminum body, an aerodynamic form, and a modified Moscovich 407 engine, making it one of the fastest Soviet vehicles ever produced. This car was designed for speed trials and was focused on pushing the boundaries. It really reached 223 kilometers per hour on Soviet courses, demonstrating that the USSR could construct racing cars as quickly as the West. However, there was a problem. The Soviet Union had no Formula One, Le Mans, and no international racing presence. While the Moscovich G2 was technically successful, it lacked the necessary stage to shine. After a few appearances in local tournaments, it sank into obscurity, another Soviet machine that never had a chance to survive. What happens when a Soviet engineer decides to build his own rally car? You get the Pangolina straight out of a sci-fi movie. Unlike most Soviet cars built by massive state-run factories, the Pangolina was a passion project. Alexander Kuligin created it as a low-slung, wedge-shaped sports car with a fiberglass body and rally-ready performance. This wasn't just a garage build, it became a pop culture icon. It appeared at Expo 85 in Japan, featured in Soviet films, and became one of the most famous DIY cars in the USSR. But no matter how cool it was, independent car production in the Soviet Union was almost unheard of. Kuligin built his masterpiece, but it could not reach mass production. The Pangolina remained a one-of-a-kind legend, a glimpse of what Soviet sports cars could have been. Imagine a Soviet family van with rotating seats, a foldable table, and enough space for 7 people. Sounds like something from the 2000s, right? Well, the USSR built it in 1986. The Nami Octa was part of a project to create the car of the future, a vehicle that would outclass Western MPVs like the Renault Espace and Chrysler Voyager. It featured a modular interior, adjustable seats that could rotate 180 degrees, a fold-out table, and a lightweight plastic body. For Soviet families, this could have been revolutionary, a comfortable, modern car designed for long trips and everyday practicality. But of course, the Soviet car industry wasn't exactly flexible. With state-controlled production focused on outdated models, there was simply no room for futuristic minivans. The Octa remained a one-off concept, a vision of what Soviet family cars could have been if only the system had allowed for this incredible innovation. Have you ever heard of a Soviet luxury car with an automatic gearbox, diesel engine, and air conditioning? Believe it or not, they did build it. The AZLK 2144 Istra was the USSR's audacious effort at a high-tech luxury car capable of competing with Mercedes-Benz and Audi. It had a fuel-efficient diesel engine, an aerodynamic design, lightweight materials, and modern technology such as a computerized dashboard. For the Soviet Union, this was a game-changer. This was a comfortable, economical, and futuristic luxury automobile designed not just for the elite, but also for the masses. However, the Soviet Union eventually crumbled. The economy collapsed, manufacturing closed, and the fantasy of owning a Soviet luxury automobile vanished. The Istra was abandoned, again another victim of a system that ran out of time. What happens when you combine Soviet aircraft technology with automotive design? You get the gas torpedo, a racing vehicle and part fighter plane. In the early 1950s, Soviet engineers aimed to build a high-speed vehicle inspired by jet aircraft. What was the result? The gas torpedo was a sleek, futuristic vehicle constructed of duralumin, the same lightweight alloy used in airplanes. It had an aerodynamic body and a peak speed of 191 kilometers per hour, making it one of the quickest Soviet automobiles at the time. But there was an issue. While the torpedo was quick, it was also very impractical. High-speed experiments like these had no place in the Soviet automotive industry, which was focused on building rugged, utilitarian cars. The gas torpedo ended up being just another ambitious prototype, a look into an alternative universe in which the USSR manufactured jet-inspired supercars. What happens when 2 Soviet hobbyists try to outsmart the state with their engineering skills? You get the Yuna, a car that can really stand the test of time compared to those factory-built ones. The Yuna wasn't just made in a factory, it came to life in a Soviet garage. This amazing handmade creation came from the minds of 2 engineers, and it was their way of showing that hobbyists in the USSR could whip up a car that could compete with those made in state factories. The Yuna, with its hand-built engine and a whopping 500,000 kilometers under its belt, was definitely no slouch. It was a car that could really go the distance, and it sure did, turning into a symbol of DIY creativity in a place that often held back personal innovation. Even though it was just a one-time project, Yuna's lasting impact shows that passion can stretch the limits of engineering in a world focused on centralization. What if the Soviet Union had created the perfect urban taxi? It was meant to revolutionize city mobility, but the world wasn't ready. In 1964, Soviet engineers at the V-Night Design Bureau developed the PT Taxi, a vehicle designed to change urban transport. It was a 4.2-meter-long futuristic taxi with sliding doors and enough space for a baby stroller. This concept car was meant to answer New York's yellow cabs, with sleek lines and a design that emphasized practicality and comfort in a modern city. But in a country that still relied heavily on buses and trains, the PT Taxi never had a chance to get off the drawing board. The project was ahead of its time, way too innovative for the Soviet market, which preferred rugged utilitarian vehicles over futuristic cabs. What if you needed a military vehicle that could travel over the rough ground in Siberia and also float on rivers? Get in the UAZ 452DG Bukhanka. This 3-axle off-road vehicle was designed to handle the most challenging terrains in Russia. With a 75-horsepower engine and mobile powers, the UAZ 452DG Bukhanka could move over land, rivers, and even muddy lakes. It was created for the military, emphasizing usefulness and strength, made to do better than the US Jeeps that were commonly used in military missions at that time. The Bukhanka became a symbol of Soviet off-road cars, frequently used in remote areas of Siberia and other harsh regions. Even today, it's still a cherished sign of Soviet engineering's ability to handle any type of land. What happens when the USSR develops a car that even James Bond can drive in his movies? Check out the ZIL-117, a limousine built for the Soviet elite. The ZIL-117 was the Soviet Union's effort to develop a luxury automobile capable of competing with Cadillac and other Western prestige brands. With a strong 6.9-liter V8 engine and a 201 km/h peak speed, it was both fast and attractive. The ZIL-117, built to carry the Soviet political elite, was intended to be luxurious, with leather upholstery, high-end finishing, and a roomy cabin. It represented the pinnacle of Soviet extravagance at a period when Western luxury automobiles were the worldwide norm. The ZIL-117's most notable appearance was in Casino Royale, when Bond's antagonist drove this formidable vehicle. The ZIL-117 demonstrated that even in a system based on egalitarian ideals, there was room for a little flair. Imagine a Soviet convertible with fuel injection, an aluminum body, and 130 km/h top speed. It was meant to be the USSR's answer to the Ford Mustang until they deemed it too decadent. The Moskvich 408 Tourist was an ambitious project designed to appeal to the Soviet elite and rival Western muscle cars. A stylish convertible with cutting-edge features like fuel injection, it represented the USSR's attempt to build a car that could stand toe-to-toe with the most iconic vehicles of the West. But despite its appeal, the Moskvich 408 Tourist was seen as too decadent for Soviet standards. Too much like the consumerism the state was trying to avoid. It was quickly shelved, and only a few prototypes ever made it out into the world. The idea of a Soviet Mustang was just too radical for the era. Still, the Moskvich 408 Tourist remains a symbol of what could have been, a bold, stylish car that could have shifted the narrative of Soviet automobiles forever. These cars weren't just failures, they were casualties of a collapsing empire. But their audacity reminds us that the future belongs to the bold. In a world where progress was dictated by politics, these vehicles were ahead of their time. These prototypes are a testament to the ingenuity that still echoes through Soviet history. What do you think? Could the Soviet Union have reshaped the automotive world if it had the chance? Smash the subscribe button for more lost chapters of automotive history. Which of these prototypes fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments.